case of Rusty Bowers and Brad Raffensperger, this was the reward for supporting him and doing everything to help him, achieve re-election, except overturn the results of the elections in those states, Arizona and Georgia, respectively. And if you're Ruby Freeman, this is the price you pay for simply doing a thankless public service. How does he continue to recruit disciples when that's how he treats people?
Nicole, it's a great question. That is one of the primary things that I think motivates people to stay loyal, because they know if they do anything to speak out, they're going to face the same mob that, all the clips you just showed. And I mean, look, the fact of the matter is this sort of behavior isn't a hypothetical. It has gone on. It is continuing to go on. When you look at the names of the grand jurors in Fulton County were put online, and almost immediately their homes, any sort of biographical data was, published online in various far-right social media fora. So the issue is this is not something that's going to stop. And, I was taken, and Trump knows that. I mean, I think anybody who thinks he is not well aware of this mob that hangs on every word that he says, they're mistaken. There's a reason he goes to Waco, Texas on the 30th anniversary of the standoff at the Branch Davidian compound for his very first campaign event. There is a reason that this is increasingly looks like some sort of, apocalyptic cult. There's a reason why Trump, by all accounts, on January 6th, refused to send a text asking people to go home for hours, despite Ivanka and Jared and anybody who could try to talk to him. He wants this. I don't think it would come as any surprise to anyone if he brought everything down around him were he to be convicted.
I want to read some reporting from Reuters that's in line with something we all talk about pretty regularly. This is a report on the state of political violence in America right now. In the early 70s, American political violence was perpetrated more often by radicals on the left and focused largely on destroying property, such as government buildings. That's according to Rachel Kleinfeld, who studies political conflict and extremism at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, a Washington think tank. Quote, "There were many, many bombings, but usually at night or after called-in warnings. The goal was not to kill people, it was to affect decisions by policymakers. In contrast, much of today's political violence is aimed at people, and most of the deadly outbursts tracked by Reuters have come from the right. Of the 14 fatal political attacks since the Capitol riot, in which the perpetrator or suspect had a clear partisan leading, 13 were right-wing assailants, 1 was on the left." Miles, I know you've been clanging the pans on this for as long as you've been coming on this program, but I wonder why you think this doesn't command the attention of all of our political leaders.
I think, I would have said to you, Nicole, previously, I think it's because they hadn't felt the effects firsthand. I mean, you and I know this, the rest of the panel knows this. Oftentimes, Washington doesn't act on something, frankly, until it affects them personally, until their constituents are complaining about it, or until it hits their personal lives. But that's actually not the case here. A lot of these members of Congress have had their homes approached by armed intruders, that, their homes have been invaded like Speaker Pelosi. It's really affecting their lives viscerally. So then you got to ask, there must be some other factor here at play. And I think Pete pointed at it earlier. It's the intimidation. It's the mob-like tactics. It's the mafia that now is the Republican Party, is that they may be experiencing the violence, but they know if they call it out, they're the next one on the figurative hit list, and God forbid that's an actual hit list. And I don't want to scare people when I talk about this, but this is just it's a data issue at this point. You look at the total volume of threats against public servants. You look at the level of chatter, as both Pete and Frank Figliuzzi often also point to on this program, and I worry it's a matter of time before we're going to see more, unfortunately, successful attempts at violence against elected leaders, and a situation that in some ways will mirror the 1960s and the 70s in the level of tumult. That's the direction that we're going right now, and law enforcement's tracking so many cases, they can't stop them all. And again, these aren't just lone wolves. The lone wolves are networking now online and across borders to advance these plots, and they're looking for what we would say is a proximate cause, a moment to declare that there's a reason to go do something. And that's what you saw in that quote at the top end of the hour from that supporter out there saying a civil war might be coming. Donald Trump and his allies have been seeding that narrative, and they're waiting to claim that there's a moment. That's what I'm watching for in 2024. Is it a loss? Is it a conviction? Is it Trump getting jailed? He is trying to build up support for that moment to create a spark that potentially leads to violence, which in his mind gives him leverage, but in our minds, it should put us in grave danger about the stability of our republic.
We're going to stop right there for a second in what he's saying. Part of that in what he's saying is true. It's very true. But you got to be able to look through the smoke screen in understanding that the system itself is broken. And those that's in control of the system knows it. And rather than them come clean, they're going to try to use Donald J. Trump as an scapegoat, even at the expense of a bloodbath here in our own country. And it's really, really sad in what they're attempting to do, because they're actually trying to undermine the American people. They're not just undermining a political figure. The system is trying to undermine the American people because the system itself knows that it's unrepairable. And they don't know how to start all over again because they haven't got all their checks and balances clarified yet through all the other superpowers, knowing that there's probably going to be a major calamity pertaining to cash being king, not only here in America, but basically all over the world. There are a few places that refuse to take cash because they can foresee the same thing that I'm seeing right now, is that the cash basically has become worthless, because whenever you have a nation that is $32 or $33 trillion in debt and steadily going backwards every day. Now, they can blame Donald Trump because of the indebtedness pertaining to what went on during his presidency regarding COVID. But the fact of the matter is that the system continues to keep getting raped. And it keeps getting raped by banks, by big conglomerates. It keeps being raped, basically a monstrous type system that's now feeding upon to itself. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that whenever you look at the ecosystem pertaining to the big shark, the big whales eating the big sharks eating the big fish, and the big fish eating the secondary fish, and the secondary fish eating the little fish, and the little fish eating basically the minnows. Whenever you no longer have, and I hope people can understand this, whenever you no longer have the middle territory that at one time the system itself was playing on, then the system starts playing on itself. In other words, if the sharks and the whales has already done ate up all the other fish other than the minnows, and they're not going to be able to stay alive off the minnows, then it starts feeding upon to itself. What done this? Who done this? When did this start? This started whenever an illegitimate president come in power pertaining to Mr. Bush, Mr. Old Man Bush, that was in control of the CIA, that for some mysterious reason was down in Dallas, Texas the day that JFK was assassinated. But it began with the 3 strikes you're out syndrome. And what they didn't think through whenever they promulgated this formula of 3 strikes and you're out, 3 strikes and you're out, is, first of all, it's a very, very cruel, mean formula. Because by and large, the system is not supposed to be about, the system itself is not supposed to be upon basically kicking somebody out of the club. In other words, because you've made 3 boo-boos in your life, now you're no longer worthy to even be looked upon as being a second-class citizen, much less a first-class citizen. A matter of fact, they're probably going to put you in the category of being a third-class citizen. So whenever you have 3 strikes and you're out, and somebody didn't promulgate the formula in understanding that what are we going to do? What are we going to do, since Ronald Reagan was the one that basically lifted the ban off of the currency towards no longer having to back it with bullion, gold bullion? What are we going to do whenever there's more people that's got the 3 strikes than there are the people that's implementing the 3 strikes? What are we going to do? now you have a system that's collapsing upon to itself. These are the very, very traits of a government, the same as Rome, basically destroying itself from the inside out. As a matter of fact, I just got through putting out a video a while ago pertaining to Cleopatra and what went on during that era. And whenever you have basically too many chiefs and not enough Indians, this is what you run into. And this is one of the reasons why I truly believe that over in England, they still practice what they practice with either their queen or their king, because that person ultimately has the power that they can choose either a yay or a nay towards whether or not we're going to continue to rabble in our own inadequacies, or whether or not we're going to try something different. That's the part that they're bumping heads on. They know they're going to have to do something different. They just can't agree on what they need to do that's going to be not only justifiable for themselves, but justifiable for we the people. So basically, we have a system right now that is basically turning into a cesspool of eating itself, and this is a clear indication of a failed system whenever you have somebody as high on the totem pole as Donald J. Trump. And you have to consider Donald J. Trump as either being a shark or a whale whenever it comes to the ecosystem that we all have to live by. And the system itself is collapsing. But so is the system over in China. So is the system over in Russia. So is the system over in India and Africa. These systems are now basically imploding upon to themselves. And now you have a resistance movement with all the 99%ers that's standing up against the 1%ers, and it's turning into I guess you'd call it a fiasco, maybe, or it's going to turn into eventually what this individual just got through saying that it could very well turn into. And God forbid if that happens over here in America, because if we are not intelligent enough to be able to work out our differences and formulate a new system, that's exactly what our enemy, our adversary overseas is waiting for. That way, once we get through weakening ourselves by killing ourselves or poisoning ourselves, either or, whenever we're basically defeating upon to ourselves, the enemy would just come in and finish us out and take over. And that's whenever the American flag will fall to the ground, and that's whenever a brand new regime will rise that will formulate a new system. And out of that new system may actually be something that will be a nightmarish event that could actually fit under the very criteria of what the Ukrainians and the Afghanistan people and other smaller countries, including China, are going through right now pertaining to the 1%ers still wanting to continue to be in power. I still point the finger, and I'll continue to point the finger at what went on during the 80s in Ronald Reagan's latter part of his administration, whenever something happened in the White House that they know was pertaining to prophecy, and they chose intentionally, willfully, to want to try to cover it up or take the individual that it happened to and basically put him out on a limb to dry. And that's exactly what they done to me for the past 30 plus years. I steadily was putting out information to the world, and whenever the heat got too hot for me, then I would basically play dead man's bluff, and I would shut up, I would sit down, I would behave until finally the coast was clear again, and then I would stand back up with the same message. I had to do that continuously again and again and again and again and again. That actually wore out a great deal of my body. I was basically a pin cushion or a whipping post for others around here that wanted to treat me this way. And the sad thing about it is, most of the people that had been treating me this way, it wasn't the tramp, it wasn't the hobo, it wasn't the homeless, it wasn't somebody the disheartened, somebody that really could care less about any type of belief system. It was those that had a belief system. It was those that was already religious. And if you get to looking at the same type of principles that come about in regards towards the Lord Jesus Christ, it was the ones that already had a sense of belief. Religion was the ones that come up against Jesus Christ and said, you know what, we're not going to put up with you. A matter of fact, we're just going to eliminate you completely off of the planet. And they thought, this is how arrogant that they was. They actually thought that by killing him, that it would be over. You know when it's going to be over? You know whenever it's going to be over? It will be over whenever the Heavenly Father says it's time for it to be over. It will be over whenever the fulfillment of all the prophecies in the holy book called the King James Version Bible, whenever all them prophecies are fulfilled in one form or the other, that's whenever it will be over, because that's whenever God the Father says it very plainly that he will create a new heaven and a new earth, and all the formal things will be passed away, and he will wipe away our tears because of all the suffering that the Luciferian Lucifer has brought upon to humanity. That means it doesn't matter if you get cremated whenever you die and you're put into some sort of a burn, or you have enough money to put yourself in some sort of a mausoleum somewhere, or some other kind of a sealed container. All that money is all in vain. And you may be saying, well, from a social standpoint, it really isn't, because it makes a statement pertaining to the quality of life in that individual that could be able to afford such of an elaborate funeral. I'm telling you, all of that is trivial whenever it's all said and done with, because it don't matter if you got a casket, a sarcophagus that's buried into something that's as deep and is overwhelming as one of the pyramids. Even the pyramids are going to be eliminated. Whenever it says in the Bible that all things, it don't say part of all things, it says all things will come to an end, and God will recreate a new heaven and a new earth. So it doesn't matter whether or not you get cremated. It doesn't matter if you have a poor funeral, or if you have a big elaborate funeral. Every bit of that money that is spent on that burial, according to the way that I'm looking at it, pertaining to everything that will be destroyed. And whenever it says everything will be destroyed, that means everything that has ever been created will be destroyed. Every molecule will be destroyed. Every molecule. Because God is going to take this and genocide it, but as he's genociding it, he will separate the wheat from the tares, or the sheep from the goats, and ultimately, whenever it's all said and done with, the thing that's going to matter is whether or not you or me or anybody else made the right, proper decision in accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. I know it's very difficult in trying to live a righteous life in today's temptations, with today's pitfalls everywhere. And it's one of the things that I myself is struggling on and struggling towards pertaining to the flesh, because no matter how elegant, no matter how smart, no matter how rich, no matter how close to God that you think that you may be, including myself, you're still going to have those same struggles. You're still going to have those same desires. You're still going to have those same pitfalls that even Jesus himself had, because Jesus was in the body. That's the reason why Jesus chose the ministry whenever he did, and that's the reason why that I think that the ministry only lasted about 3.5 years, was because out of that 3.5 years, he was so dedicated to the Father, he barely ate almost anything during that time in keeping his flesh under subjection. Well, if you do that again and again and again, day in, day out, eventually there's going to be some organs that's going to begin to fade or diminish. That's basically ain't going to be able to be self-sustainable in the form of calories and good quality of living, as far as vitamins, etc. Eventually, the body will go through a transformation period to the point that, yeah, you may be in control of the body to a certain degree, but even if you're in control of the body, there's still certain elements that's going to go on with the body that basically, because you starved a certain particular organ, because you starved a certain particular vitamin, or you starved a certain particular this or that, because of that, there'll be consequences that will erupt in your body. That's the reason why Jesus said that man cannot live by bread alone, but by every word of the word thy God. Right now, we're going through a very, very harsh transformation period with everything going on in the world, as far as the violence, as far as the systems that are clashing, as far as the 99 percenters that are standing up against the 1 percenters. And it doesn't matter if you're standing up against the 1 percenters here in America, or you're standing up against the 1 percenters in some other country. It's come down to a survival game, basically. And of course, COVID was one of the conduits that fumigated all this, that got this going this way, because there was so many people's businesses. There was so, including my son. My son had a heck of a good business down in Memphis, Tennessee, but because COVID hit, it caused disruptions in the company, and he was the one that basically was the whipping post, the scapegoat that caught it from the main company, and the company used him basically as a example towards taking it out on him. You're going to see more and more of that as big organizations, big financial industries start crumbling and falling. You're going to see more and more CEOs and stuff like that that's basically going to go through the same type of event of what happened during 1929, towards people basically jumping out of windows and committing suicide, because they're going to think that because they have failed in setting their ducks up so high, that the next best thing is to basically leave this world in a form of a suicide pact. And it's really sad, because it is the 1 percenters that took their eye off the ball that allowed for this to occur. It was the 1 percenters that dug all these oil wells, that thought that oil was going to last endlessly forever and ever and ever, that didn't pay attention to the climate changes that was going on, pretending to global warming. It was the 1 percenters that basically organized all this, that now we're seeing the repercussions all over the planet, either in too much rain or not enough rain. In other words, the country has the planet has become very, very unstable, and it didn't become unstable over the 99 percenters. It become unstable because somebody didn't pay close enough attention to what was actually happening to our planet. And Right now, they're in the process of trying to crawfish. But like I said a while ago, they know that their system that they protect, that they glorify, is basically crumbling below their own feet. But nobody is smart enough to be able to put the pieces back together again like Humpty Dumpty. That way we can recover from all this without it being that devastating. So inevitably, this trajectory that we're on right now with this train wreck is only going to get closer to the edge as we go further along. And the sad and the really the ironic thing about it was that whenever I was up in Land Between the Lakes between 2007 up until about 2012, in that 5-year period whenever I was attacked, I couldn't tell you the amount of people that approached me in the Land Between the Lakes area that questioned me towards how come I was challenging the system. And the whole time, I was trying to put out warnings and advisories towards warning people of what to expect and what was coming around the corner pertaining to a bloody road ahead, and also pertaining to major electrical disturbances all over the planet. I was doing my thing in regards towards fasting and praying for peace pertaining to the sword symbolizing peace on earth. That same characteristic coming from the same person that is speaking to you right now and behind the camera was the very person that got attacked by Homeland Security in 2000, let me get it right, in 1989, when my son and I went to New York City on our first pilgrimage, a crusade, and I come back to Tennessee and I dropped him off, and then I went back to the East Coast, but this time I didn't go all the way to New York, I only went to Washington, D.C., and that's whenever some trying times happened in 1989, while I still had the Apocalypse model in the back of my truck, and come back home, had enough money at the time. Everything that I've done since I've stepped out into the eyes of the public, I've been self-sustainable. Nobody has backed me. Nobody has financed me. Nobody has gotten in behind towards helping me in being able to put out my material to the world. I went back to Washington, D.C. That's whenever I had problems, severe problems. After that, I come back the second time, and the sword that was in a locked-up case got confiscated from me. Because that sword got confiscated from the ministry pertaining to Homeland Security down in Madison County, Tennessee, it really put a burr under my saddle that launched a third pilgrimage of going back up into Washington, D.C., and that's whenever things sure enough got hairy. You keep in mind, whenever they confiscated the sword, the first sword from the ministry, they must have thought that I was going to formulate some sort of a retaliation against the government, and they rather have stopped it, nipped it at the bud, than let it go on, because America had went through some other severe situations similar towards like the Jim Jones deal. The David Koresh deal hadn't yet taken place in 1991 or 1989. And then there was another event that happened in my life in 1990 or 91 in Wheeling, West Virginia. That's whenever certain people, powerful people, said, you know what? Let's do this to him. Let's stain him for life. Pretty obvious. He ain't foaming at the mouth. He knows what to tell these psychiatrists every time we get him pinned up with a doctor. Let's just mark him towards having the potential of being a homegrown terrorist, that he was on his way. This is what they done to me now. I'm not saying that it actually happened. This is what they fumigated. This is what they created. Let's create this paperwork trail to the degree in Wheeling, West Virginia, that Mr. Jackson said that he was on his way to Washington, D.C. to being an assassin of taking out George Walker Bush's life. And the whole time I was going up to Washington, D.C., I won't deny that. But it was not to do any harm or hurt to a president of the United States or anybody else as far as that goes. It was to open up a can of worms pertaining to what had went on in 1988 that shouldn't have went on, that the church world and the communities around here in Tennessee took a part of. A great deal of them did. Some of them now is probably already dead, gone. Matter of fact, I know they are. But they'll still give an account for these things, of this movement that happened in the late 80s in Ronald Reagan's administration, that has led us down this endless path of where we are today. And I still say, and I'll always say, that they are paying the people, the good people of America are paying such of a humongous price because of the stupidity of those that thought that they was going to be able to succeed in overthrowing God and God's kingdom and God's precious people that serve God. Not saying that I'm perfect. Not saying that I can raise the dead or walk on water yet or turn water into wine. But I'm still a committed, loyal subservient for God Almighty. So whenever I look at all these disturbances, especially what's going on with the President of the United States being indicted now for the 4th time, that kind of reminds me of the 4 horsemen. The very thing that I've been teaching and preaching on, along with the salvation plan of God through the Lord Jesus Christ, pertaining to John 3:16. It really could not have happened to a better group of people in all their attempts basically blowing up in their faces and backfiring. And the exact same thing happened to the people over in Jerusalem and Israel, because if you look at what happened after the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, them poor people went through hell. They went through absolute hell. Because basically the clinches of hell was unleashed upon them people because of what they done to their own person. The thing about the events that's occurred in my particular life, it makes me wonder how many other people out there, male or female, has been touched by God, and they've got a very, very divine anointing, true anointed anointing about them, that basically their peers or their community has turned against them towards trying to put them in the category of being crazy or somebody that was a harm to society in some form or fashion. And I'm just not talking about in this particular generation. I'm talking about going all the way back into 1500s, 1600s, back whenever the psychiatric communities was basically throwing people in dungeons and doing lobotomies on them and poison them and everything else. This thing called wickedness has only been intensifying in the past few hundred years, and it's become much, much more wittier and much, much more powerfuler. So by the system itself collapsing upon to itself and engulfing itself the way that it's doing right now, pertaining to its inadequacies, it couldn't have happened to a better group of people, as far as I'm concerned. Now, does that mean that I wanted this to happen? No, I did not want this to happen. I wanted the ministry that God had given me to help to orchestrate pertaining to the Windmill Ministries missions. I wanted this ministry to thrive. I wanted to see a revival. I wanted to see a utopia, a peace. I wanted to see love and commitment. I wanted to see things coming back the way that there was back whenever I was a teenager, or even before I was a teenager, growing up in this community where people trusted one another and they cared for one another. That's what I wanted. But I didn't get that. So in actuality, it wasn't Dennis James Jackson that was challenging the system, but it was the other way around. It was the system that was challenging Dennis James Jackson. And the thing about Dennis James Jackson was in the confounds of his delegated constitutional rights. Regardless whether I was fasting and praying in LBL or I was down here in the bottom fasting and praying. Regardless whether I built a praying altar in LBL or I built one down here on Obion River somewhere. According to our Constitution, I have a right to do these things. And during the time that I was doing these things was during the time that I was being attacked again and again and again. So whenever I look at the big picture, putting all the dots together, and please, I pray for the innocent of those that are being subjected to all this type of wickedness going on right now because of these morons, because of these heathens, because of these demons that have done this. But whenever I look at it, I look at it in a very, very remorseful, sorrowful way, because if the system had not done what the system done here in America, I truly do not believe that we would be going through what we're going through right now, that we would all be having a form of utopia or prosperity in the form of peace. But now, because of all the greed and all the selfishness and because of all the sharks, all the whales, now they're beginning to infestate upon to themselves. So whenever I say it couldn't have happened to a better group of people, I'm not talking about all people. I'm talking about the wicked. I'm talking about the powerful. I'm talking about those that thought that they was smart enough or highly intelligent enough that they was going to be able to whip somebody the same way that they thought that they was going to be able to whip the Lord Jesus Christ. And the thing about it is, Jesus Christ's message of his ministry become a trillion, billion, quadrillion times more powerful after his death than what he ever thought about during his life. And we've seen that again with people like Martin Luther King here in America. We've seen that again with other people that had a strong, strong message, that was a godly message. We've seen that again and again and again. Princess Diana, she had a very, very powerful message. And her message has become incredibly strong after her death, more so than during her life. Her message was strong during her life, but it's become more powerful after her death. And that may be what it takes before the founder of the Windmill Ministries, before my message is truly going to get out there to be observed and recognized and honored the way that it should have been all along. In the meantime, I'm going to continue to keep fighting. I'm going to continue, if I have to, I'll play dead man's bluff again, and I'll lay low, and then I'll stand back up again, and I'll come back up with the same message, the very same message that obviously was going up against the grain, the religious grain, because it was the religious people that made my life miserable. Just like it was the religious people that made Jesus Christ's life miserable. It was the religious people that made all the prophets of God in their lives miserable, that run them from town to town, to village, that persecuted them and prosecuted them illegitimately. So whenever I say that it couldn't have happened to a better group of people, I really and truly do mean that, but I mean it in a very, very remorseful, sorrowful way. Because all of this, every bit of this could have been avoided. that they have brought upon to themselves. Now, those same powerful people that I'm talking about, not all of them are wicked and demonic. Not all of them are bad people. But until we see a stir of those people that has that kind of authority, that has that kind of money, that has that kind of influence, until we see a stir of that going in the righteous type way, pertaining to the opening of the first seal in the book of Revelations, pertaining to the things that I've been teaching and telling people, that now the Luciferian Lucifer has basically created himself in a fleshly form, that's now walking around in Saudi Arabia, that masterminded 9/11. Until people get in behind that, and I'm talking about the powerful people, the influential people, we're going to steadily be going downhill with every emotion and every movement that you can think of. And if that's what it's going to take, is a bloodbath here in America, well then bring it on. Because the sooner that they end up eliminating me from this planet, and I get an opportunity of leaving this crushed up, broken up body that Satan has brought all these afflictions upon to myself because of me trying to survive while he was trying to take my life. If that's what it takes, then so be it. Because to be absent from the body means to be present with the Lord. But you see, they've wisened up since the assassination of Jesus Christ, since the assassination of various people like Martin Luther King. And they don't want to actually kill me. I've said this before in some of my other work. They actually don't want to kill me because they know what's coming after my death, which is great tribulation. Whenever God comes back in flaming fire, taking vengeance upon them who know not God, and upon them who obey not the gospel, and he will burn everything down to the ground that is burnable pertaining to people's homes and businesses. It says in the Bible, see thou hurt not the oil nor the wine, see thou hurt not the vegetation. Whenever he does this surrounding the earth, pertaining to gathering up the elect from the four corners of the earth, but everything else will be burnt. It'll be total chaos down here. In other words, the communications will be almost zilch to nothing. Your food supply will be almost zilch to nothing because it takes proper sunlight for proper crops to grow. And if the sun is darkened, as dark as sackcloth, and the moon is as red as blood during this time, you're not going to get proper vegetation growth. Without proper vegetation growth, you're going to have massive starvation, which will lead to basically cannibalism. That's already started in some countries, especially over in Africa, pertaining to the headhunters. It's really sad because all of this could have been avoided. All of this could have been avoided, beginning right here in Northwest Tennessee, that has now tripled or quadrupled, whatever word you want to use, pertaining to global warming, that we're seeing now escalate all over the planet. That, guess what? The people over in Kenton, Tennessee, that was a part of this movement, going back 40 plus years ago, they're going to give an account for this. The people right here in Weakley County, and Obion County, and within about 7 or 8 counties stretching in this area, that knows of me, that knows of this message, that chose not to support or participate in this message, they're going to give an account for all this. So the sooner that this torment ends in my life that has been manifested by those 1%ers, by the religious sector, the sooner that they eliminate me from the planet the same way that they've done other prophets of God, including the Lord Jesus Christ, the better off that I'll be. So that's where I am. I'm in between a hard place and a rock. And the only thing basically that I could do is do like I'm doing right now by putting out these messages to social media platform. And that's another area that has taken them by surprise, is that they thought that they had me whipped after me going through remorse, being attacked again and again and again. And my last attack was whenever I come back here in 2014, and then my brother died, and then they attacked me again in 2017. But you know what? They didn't finish me off. Loudmouth still got a voice, and Loudmouth is letting people know what occurred, why it occurred, and who done the occurring. And that's the part that just eats them alive, is the fact that Loudmouth is still putting out his messages.
Hospitalized, investigators say the gunman immediately began firing at arriving officers, who killed him in a hail of gunfire.
Also, we started hearing gunshots more, and people started screaming and running.
Tonight, a scene of chaos and carnage with innocent families in the crosshairs.
Investigators are pouring through the suspect's life, and tonight it appears he drove from Ohio here to California with a plan to kill. Lester?
All right, Miguel, thank you. We're tracking severe weather on the move. 20 million people on alert from the Midwest to the Northeast. Multiple cities hit with flash floods, including Las Vegas, where an urgent search is happening tonight. We get more from Maggie Vespa.
From the Ohio River Valley to the famed Vegas Strip. Wreckage and rescues amid torrential flash floods. In a nearby wash, authorities say multiple people were swept away. 2 are still missing. Slots soaked after storms damaged the ceiling at Harrah's Casino.
It started raining and raining and raining.
Parts of southern Michigan clocking more than an inch of rain per hour overnight. In northern Ohio, storms knocked out power for tens of thousands. Drivers rescued. Part of a parking garage collapsed. Daylight in Detroit revealing cars swallowed. Telephone poles snapped. Roads impassable near Detroit's airport, with passengers stranded after underground tunnels flooded. Thousands of flights delayed, hundreds canceled.
On our way to the airport, we actually we were only about a mile and a half away, and all of a sudden the traffic got really bad. There were cars you could tell that had just gone completely underwater.
Fast-moving storms wreaking havoc coast to coast tonight, with millions still at risk.
Here in Canton, Michigan, the water came in fast and now it's receding fast. But we're seeing cars like this one seemingly stuck all over town. And tonight, tow truck drivers are busy. Lester.
All right, Maggie Vespa, thank you. In 60 seconds, the new global controversy: treated radioactive wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear power plant released into the ocean. How safe is it?
As someone living with type 2 diabetes?
As I've said, it's only going to increase, and it's going to get worse. Obviously, they don't have faith in what I'm telling them, or they have made a conscious decision in not wanting to counter this, and because of it, they're now wreaking problems all over the world. And you know what's really sad about it is that what is these undeveloped countries going to do, and the developed countries, what are they going to do once they realize that it was the Americans, and even greater than that, it was the Tennesseans that helped to create this infliction that has now engulfed their own countries and their own planet? What are they going to think of the Weakley County courts? What are they going to think of Kenton, Tennessee? What are they going to think about all these places that I continue to keep bringing out to the general public about what has occurred over here in America that was not supposed to have occurred? Which once more makes me wonder how many more of the people out there that has similar testimonies, similar to mine, that has been roughed up, and some even put to death, is what the Bible says, that some will actually be put to death regarding what's going on right now. And I'm really, really surprised that they didn't do that to me, and they would have had if the Heavenly Father hadn't been protecting me the way that the Heavenly Father had been protecting me, they would have done already eliminated me and made it look like an accident. There is not absolutely no question about that whatsoever, because there's people right around here that I've never done anything, absolutely nothing to them, that despise me, and if they see me on the road or if I'm in aisle 8, they try to eliminate and get around me by going into aisle 7 or aisle 6 because they hate my guts. Now they'll lie to you and they'll tell you, oh no, we don't hate Juby. Juby's imagination's running wild. Oh yeah? Proof is in the pudding towards how they feel about me. And the thing about it is, every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every week, every month, every year that goes by is that much of an opportunity that they could have made things right, but they chose not to. But they'll still talk about the Antichrist. And they'll still talk about the New World Order. And they'll still promote the ideal of the false prophet and 666 and the two witnesses. But in the meantime, I'm basically out on a limb to dry that's being tormented and beat up on a day-to-day level. Has it retrieved a little bit in my life? To some degree. To some degree it's retrieved. But that doesn't mean it couldn't start all over again just within a matter of seconds. I have people all the time that drive by here, rev up their motors, squall their tires, throw out beer cans, shoot me birds going down the road. I have people all the time that literally hate my guts, and they display that on a day-to-day level. Now, it has backed off a little bit in comparison to what it was before some of their main leaders around here, God went ahead and took them out. Took them out of either in the form of aneurysms or committing suicides or having bad accidents on the road or whatever. They're finally getting a message around here to leave me alone, but it wasn't because of the Weakley County judicial system working up there in the courthouse that done it. It was because of God Almighty that done it. Because if they had their way about it up there in the Weakley County courthouse, I would still be used as a pincushion or an scapegoat down here towards being whipped up on each and every day towards trying me, just exactly seeing how far that they could go with old Juby. That's exactly what they done with Jesus. They thought that they could try him, that if we put enough pressure on Jesus, eventually he'll cave, he'll give in, and he'll beg for forgiveness. He'll tell the people that he was only fooling them the whole time and that he was not the Son of God. But you know what? Jesus never caved. Jesus never caved. And the reason why he didn't cave is because the things that God had engrafted up into his heart and up into his mind, up into his body, was in fact real. Just like the things that God has embarked up into my life, pertaining to saving my life again and again and again, and pertaining to the spirituality revelations that God has given me, are real. Now they're going to tell you, no, that's just Juby's imagination. Well, it's a funny thing that every time Juby gets ready to say something about an event that's going to happen, just like what's going on right now with the Panama Canal, towards them having to shut the Panama Canal or slow the Panama Canal down and not having as much weight loads going through the Panama Canal, because now the deterioration of water in droughts down in that area is causing major disruptions. Just like the bloody road ahead, just like major electrical disturbances. I have tried and tried and tried, just like Jesus tried. Jesus tried to help his people over in Jerusalem. He really did. But they wasn't going to have it. They wasn't going to listen to it. They was not going to accept him. And it basically fulfills a prophecy that Jesus said that a true prophet is without honor among his own people in his own country. And maybe that's another reason why that we're being flooded with all these foreigners coming over here, because eventually there will be a movement out of the Windmill Ministries missions, even if it means God having to take every foreigner in every other country and bring them into America so that we all can pull together towards wanting to defeat this evil entity that is now tricked and caused so much problems pertaining to the oil tycoon industries, and also the ones that masterminded and also assassinated a New York journalist. You know, a lot of times I get tired talking to myself, talking to the TV. You know, there's really no response. And that's the reason why that I interchange a lot of times by getting out here and having interviews with people or talking to different people. Matter of fact, I just run upon somebody the other day. I haven't seen her now in about 4 or 5 years, basically since my brother died. I think I've seen her one time after my brother died, about maybe 3 years ago. That was married to my older brother Danny, and I found out where she works and find out a little bit about her children and stuff. And I hope to be able to sit down with her before long and actually have an interview with her if she'll agree to it. I don't want to mention her name. Those that know me closely, knows her name. But she knows the details of the abusivenesses that went on with the family going all the way back into the late 70s and the early 80s. Like I said, she was married to my older brother, Danny, Robert Jackson, before they got a divorce. And then my older brother's life was in torment pertaining to what went on with his dad, towards his dad abusing Danny the way that Danny was abused. But then again, I can also see in other areas that Danny kind of brought it onto himself, the way that he was rebellion against his dad, because he would spit on him, cuss him, call him all kinds of names. I'm really surprised that my father didn't kill him. And there was times that I really thought that he was going to kill him, and thank God that he didn't. But he did kill him in a sense, towards emotionally, mentally, and it basically threw him off into a state of being an alcoholic. That basically was the doom to him of him dying at the age of 56. There's a lot of people that knows the facts about our family, and when we moved down here after my grandfather died in 1969, that something was triggered in my dad that caused my dad to do what he done. And just like I told the young lady yesterday that I bumped into, I told her, I said, I ain't gonna lie to you, I still have animosity feelings against the people that was either my brother's ages or my dad's age, that most of them are now deceased and died now, that I still have animosity feelings against these people because they didn't even have enough audacity to pick up the telephone to call up the proper authorities by reporting what was going on out here. That's pretty bad whenever you sit and you watch a family get destroyed pertaining to children being damaged, and nobody's willing to pick up the phone and try to help that family. I don't think it can get much any worse than that, other than they themselves is doing the damage.
Controversy over the Fukushima nuclear plant. 12 years after the disaster there, Japan has begun releasing treated radioactive wastewater into the Pacific. But how safe is it? Janice Mackey Freyer has more from Fukushima.
Tonight, the first of more than 1 million tons of treated radioactive wastewater being pumped into the Pacific Ocean a half-mile from the shore. The discharge from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, where reactors melted down after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. The contaminated water used to cool melted fuel has been stored in holding tanks that are now nearly full, enough to fill 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Japanese officials say there's nowhere else for the water to go.
And so begins a long process to discharge all the treated water, which will be pumped into the ocean off Fukushima's coast for the next 30 to 40 years.
The filtered water still contains tritium at levels experts say aren't dangerous, and the UN's nuclear watchdog is backing the plan. But it's making waves across the region with fears of environmental and health risks. China's slapping an all-out ban on imports of Japanese fish and seafood. Japan will immediately pollute the water, said this Chinese vendor. A lack of trust is why these volunteers set up their own lab. They're not scientists, but a group of mothers. Aikimura says their children should know what they're inheriting. If the treated water is discharged, she says, she feels the tragedy from 12 years ago could be repeated. Radiation concerns linger here. Even now, this town near the crippled plant remains deserted.
Releasing the water is raising economic concerns too, with the fisheries industry here worried Japan's image may never recover. Lester?
Janice Mackey Freyer tonight, thank you. And coming up, a notorious killer called a prime suspect in 2 unsolved murders. We speak to his daughter, who is helping in the case. Next.
I suffer with psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis. I was on a journey for a really long time.
Okay, let's go back to this real quick.
Cosmetics works for me.
They was trying to photograph.
In this case, a defendant report. So
There you go.
she's already, I mean, that's a long process. She's batting 1,000 in front of judges. And it's, you know,
This is more chaos that's going on, along with the report that you just got pertaining to the nuclear waste. Some major big events has occurred on this planet for the past 40 plus years. And every one of them has been chaotic and harsh and bad in some form or fashion. And they're only getting worse. They're not getting better. Just like you've seen the reports of all the storms and all the flooding. And I mean, this year's price tag pertaining to natural catastrophes since the ordeal happened over in Hawaii will probably compass what the natural catastrophes was last year, and we're not even halfway through hurricane season yet. Hurricane season is still brewing down in the south. To see the weather right now being at 99 to 100 degrees today, August 24th, 2023 here in America is one thing. But to see the weather warm up to 82, 85, maybe even almost 90 degrees in the dead winter time, long about Christmas, and then have an outbreak of tornadoes, people are going to have to awaken in where we are, because if we don't, the calamity that we're heading towards is going to be unlike any world calamity that the world has ever went through. And that includes World War I, that includes World War II, that includes the Spanish flu, that includes other types of pandemics and other types of problems that the world has went through. We are heading towards a calamity like never before if people does not change their attitudes and try to get on a better course, a more godlier course in life. That's the best that I can say about it. And as far as I'm concerned, they're just turning Donald Trump into another circus clown, or trying to turn him into a circus clown. And they know that before he ever run for presidency, they know that he was not a professional politician, that he'd been given in all the lies and all the deceit. And this is one of the reasons why that I blame the Republicans just as much as I do the Democrats, because they have created a diversion to where people are paying attention to the smaller dots and not putting all the bigger dots together. In other words, they can't see the trees for the forest. They're still trying to blame this administration that we're in now towards all the problems, and not looking at the administration before that and the administration before that, Obama's administration, Bill Clinton's administration, young Bush's administration, and then senior Bush's administration. They're too weak-minded or narrow-minded to be able to put everything together that I can see just as plain as the markings on the wall. Do you realize every time that they rustle up this man's feathers, how much money that it costs for extra security and extra this and extra that? Do you have any idea what it's costing right now for that helicopter to be flying up in the sky just to be able to zoom down on Donald Trump? How much fuel that thing is burning every minute just for them to put on this show? And that's exactly what it is. It's a circus show. It's a diversion. It's taken the American people's energy off the things that they should be focusing on and focusing on things that we shouldn't be focused on. It's a distraction. And if the whole world is going through some sort of distraction in some form, fashion, or another, my question is, where's the end game to all this? What's going to be the final fiasco that's going to arise from all of this? And that's, my friends, whenever you start getting into a very, very scary thought pattern in just exactly where we're heading as a society. Not just as an American society, but as a world society. And in ways I think Donald Trump knew this and still knows this, and that's one reason why that he's still stirring the pot towards basically being a rebel riser. And he's still drawing or holding on to short straws, hoping that maybe something will come about to where we can turn this all around, to where it don't turn into such of a major global world event. I personally think that he's used the wrong tactics in trying to accomplish what he's tried to accomplish by draining the swamp. That's strictly my opinion about Donald Trump. Donald Trump did do some magnificent things during his presidency, but he also done some very, very bad things. And I'm not a political person, and it ain't right for me to intervene in the American people's history pertaining to their political affairs, even though it was their political affairs that intervened or challenged the spiritual affairs. Once again, it was not the founder of the Windmill Ministries that challenged the system. It was the other way around, that the American system challenged the founder that was trying to basically force him into a state of defect. They wanted me to defect. They wanted me to throw up my hands and blame it all on the government that our ancestors created. And it's not the government that has done this, but it's various people that is working and has been working for the government that has created this. And it's not just been created in my life, but it's been created now in lots of people's lives. And eventually there will be a movement. It may take the failure of another 30 million homes to be foreclosed on, and to put that many more people out on the streets, and that many more jails to be overfilled, and that many more fentanyl people are dying, and more gun violence, and etc. It may take going into even a deeper, darker point of history, and if it does, then that's something that, once more, the people over in Kenton, the people in Weakley County, the people in the surrounding counties here in Northwest Tennessee, and most definitely the people in Washington, D.C., most definitely the Secret Service are going to give an account for. Now, they'll tell you, oh, no, Juby, he's just that's his imagination running wild. I promise you, it's not my imagination, especially whenever I got documentation to prove what I'm talking about. And that's one of the things that they're frightening me about, and I'm really surprised that they hadn't come at me in trying to do the same old like they done in my life whenever my brother died in 2017, towards trying to get me to admit to a charge or plead out towards going to a psychiatric ward, towards having me institutionalized. That's been what they wanted to do to me all along. They wanted to silence me. And they want to silence Donald Trump. And they want to silence anybody else that speaks up now today about the system being raw and broken. They don't like it. They don't like troublemakers like us, because that's how they see us. They see us as being troublemakers because we're not taking it laying down. But I just wanted to emphasize that every time an event like this happens, it costs the local, state, and the federal taxpayers again and again and again. Now, you wonder how come we're $33 trillion in debt. You wonder how come that the debt ceiling has been raised since 1960 about 70 something different times. There you go. We got a runaway train. We got people that don't know how to grab a hold of the situation and basically control something that is uncontrollable. So they create these illusions. They create these smoke screens. They create these diversions, hoping that people such as myself will not catch on to them. Hoping that maybe they'll get lucky and they'll be able to catch a break. My friends, whenever you're $30 plus trillion in the hole, and you're seeing all these problems erupting in the 21st century here in America, there's not going to be a break. There's only going to be one break, and that's the break towards them doing a 180-degree turn and doing the right thing and giving me not just a little mic, but a big mic. It's going to take, just as Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, says again and again and again, it's going to take God to turn it around. And if the people that confess to be godly are not willing to do the proper and right thing, well then we're still heading in the wrong directions. And whenever I say that, I'm saying it to all. I'm not just saying it to part of all, but all.
Jefferson Street in the heart of Atlanta. This is the former president's motorcade pulling into the facility here. This may be the exact opposite of a pride parade if I've ever been to one.
Sorry, my cultural reference point there is called Bikes on Bikes. And it's the start of the pride parade, and you know things are about to get fun. This is a different feeling, but similar number of wheels.
You've rendered Vaughn speechless.
One thing we're looking at, and Vaughn will pipe back in, but one thing we're looking at is, of course, the two sides of this that are both at issue in the alleged coup and in today's proceeding, that you do have federal a law enforcement involved in the protection of a former president.
Should.
Most people
Yes.
do not. He is what we call a protectee for life. That he did have people who were able to respond to lawful orders while president. And so this continues now. This is, I knew we were going to watch this tonight, Rachel, but I'm almost seeing it like this. It's really surreal because it physically shows the combining of the two arms of authority here. This is the federal authority protecting the former president and the state authority that is booking him as a defendant with rights, but as a defendant who could be convicted and forcibly incarcerated if convicted. We're seeing both these things in the motorcade entering the jail
That's
facility.
a striking image there. You can see the jail itself, recognizable to all of us who have ever driven past an urban jail. You see that at the top of your screen there as the motorcade pulls into the parking lot that has been presumably cleared for security purposes for this moment. We do expect that we may see the former president exit the vehicle and walk into the jail. Actually, forgive me, in the center of your screen there, that's a sort of sally port, so it's a covered area. So presumably he will enter through there, which means we may not see him physically get out of the vehicle, but we'll have to see in terms of how this goes.
Rachel, can I say something about his pathetic email?
Yes.
It's not an innocent man walking into jail. It depends on the forum. That's a fundraising pitch to pay for the gas to get that campaign grifter plane home. He is not denying the conduct. He does not deny the greatness of January 6th. I mean, this is about exploiting and endangering his own base of support. It's about using them to pay for a defense for crimes he doesn't even deny committing. The whole thing is a scam.
There has not been a defense mounted either by him or by any of his Republican supporters.
Or lawyers.
Based on, well, Findling has said he didn't, told Ari he didn't commit any crimes. He didn't break any laws. I think it's the only time I've ever heard anybody say that in the context of this case. The defense is not he didn't do it. The defense is he should not be charged no matter what he did. That what he did shouldn't be charged as a crime, despite prima facie what he admits to in terms of his behavior. But let me just reiterate, let's just underscore with this moment. This is the county jail in Fulton County, Georgia, which is a jail that is under federal civil rights investigation. It is a notorious jail. There have been horrific deaths in custody there, including a recent one, a very high profile one, of a prisoner, I don't like the term inmate for complicated reasons, but a prisoner who was found on the psych ward effectively inside the Fulton County jail, dead and with a terrible insect infestation. I mean, this is a facility that is decrepit, and the Fulton County, Georgia sheriff has asked for $2 billion effectively to build an entirely new facility because this place is such a disgrace and it is so dangerous. Donald Trump is likely to have a very quick pass-through in his experience there, but that is the facility that he is in, and they did not put him somewhere tidier for this part of the process, and that itself says a lot about what it means to be subject to the criminal justice system and treated like a citizen rather than as a VIP.
And to the point that you made, I'm sorry, the point that you were making, just to amplify it, it is actually kind of remarkable to watch a former president have to submit to state authority, have to submit to, it is sort of a federalist kind of triumph, right? That no matter how high you are, no matter what sort of rung of power you achieve, and he achieved the highest one in American politics, in the end, you're just a citizen, and you have to go through the filthy jail if you're accused of it.
Yeah, you're a citizen, and we're looking at the back and forth of the shot Rachel was describing, and then inside that other pool shot from inside one of the vehicles. Sometimes people ask us what's going to happen in the future. Is he going to be convicted? I always say I don't know. I could tell you, to Rachel's point earlier, I know about past RICO cases. They almost always involve some pleas and some convictions among the group. I cannot tell you the future, but it is rare to have a RICO case in this district or any other where there's 19 people and 0 are convicted. And so that goes to that collective accountability. The other point I want to share is, one question we might all have is, what's going through this RICO defendant's mind, Donald Trump, as he walks in there? We don't have, I'm not aware of reporting on that, but I'll tell you this, I don't usually talk a lot about the bookings I used to do, but when I worked at Manhattan Public Defenders, you go into that booking room, I don't care who you are, and I don't care how tough you are, whether some people feel they're tough because they've been there before, or they've been known people who go there, or they're from a higher station in life and they think that station will ultimately, in the end, bail them out. I gotta tell y'all, just thinking about this right now, I haven't seen a booking where people didn't look scared for a minute. Sometimes they cover it up, sometimes it comes and goes. But in my past experience, I can't tell you what he's thinking. It is a scary process because the physicality of it is those people through that process are very aware that the jail's over there, the bailiff's over there, the people with weapons are in charge, the judge feels way more powerful flanked by the people with weapons.
Yeah.
And you start imagining even for a second, what if this was your long-term reality?
That's like, and I was actually the comment that the last thing he thinks Donald Trump thinks of before he goes to bed at night is the clang of that jail cell door shutting behind him. I mean, I do wonder what happens because, as you point out, this is the state protecting the integrity of its elections. But when you look at the severability of this and the fact that Cheesebro is going to go first, and likely this is going to come apart into different pieces, I do wonder if we're not ultimately going to be turning our eyes to Washington, D.C., to the Supreme Court, because I think Donald Trump is going to do everything in his power to push this as far as he can. And, you know, there are going to be real questions about federal versus state, depending on what happens in the next election. There are a lot of open questions about whether conclusion will be seen anytime soon, but man, it is a real stress test of democracy to see federal protection and state protection intersecting in this particular moment.
The pool reporter who's with the former president as this process is happening has just confirmed that former President Donald Trump is inside the Fulton County Jail right now. We saw his motorcade arrive at the jail. We surmised that he had gone in. He's in the vehicle that we believe he was in. We think is under that covered portion of the entrance of the jail, so we can't necessarily see it directly, but confirmed he is out of the vehicle and inside the.
I want you to stop for a second. Just imagine that you're part of the oligarchs in Russia or China or some of the other 1%ers all over the world, and you're watching this again and again and again, and now this makes the fourth time in watching this. Would this not automatically be telling you that America is breaking up? That America is basically going through a very rough time, to say the least, in what's happening over here in America? Sure it would. Sure it would. You keep in mind that even though those people don't speak our same language, they're still knowledgeable of knowing things like we know that happens over there in their countries. And what it spells is instability. It spells instability, and I've said this before, back whenever I was working in some of the bigger body shops that I've worked in, that usually if an estimator wound up quitting for whatever reason or he got fired, that throw the red flag with a great deal of insurance companies towards backing off and not feeding that company near as much work until they knowed that the instability that was going on in the office had been worked out. And I'm pretty sure that we're going to see this same type of scenario happening in other countries, that they're going to be leery of dealing with America because they're going to see instability. People don't like instability. Nobody likes instability. I don't care if you're an insurance company or a politician or a business person of some sort. Nobody likes instability. And what this is displaying openly before the world is just exactly that. Instability.
Vehicle and inside the jail right now, which means that in all likelihood the booking process is underway as we speak. Ari, to a point that you were making about seeing this visual, about seeing a lifelong federal protectee of the Secret Service brought to state authorities for his bodily surrender, for him to be, he's now in state custody as a criminal defendant in the state of Georgia. I mean, one of the other things we may ultimately get to here is the question of whether or not his Secret Service protection itself means that even if he is convicted and sentenced to jail, they won't put him in a jail. They're going to say, the Secret Service believes that you cannot be adequately protected in a prison, in a state prison or in a federal prison, and so you're going to serve your term in house arrest or in some sort of modified.
Yeah, it's very possible.
Modified custody that is effectively a downstream from his status as a federal protectee. I mean, that's absolutely untested territory. It may be something that makes even the prospect of prison time, a prison sentence, a tolerable outcome for Donald Trump in terms of thinking about what he's willing to stand.
I would say two things. One, the precedents under American law are not good for defendant Trump there, because governors who are the chief executive of their state, although they don't have, as you precisely pointed out, necessarily the lifelong protection, governors oversee sometimes the attorney general and definitely the chief law enforcement officer. And when convicted, most of them have wound up, as Democrat Rod Blagojevich did, in prison. And there are extra measures taken. Tucker was asking Donald Trump about Jeffrey Epstein, who did die in a prison. There were measures taken. I use that as a recent example. There were measures taken for extra protection. So either you could have a federal facility created for him, you could have a solo scenario.
And that's another joke pertaining to Joe Osteen. You know good and well he didn't commit suicide. Even Donald Trump said that the morning that they found his body, supposedly. But all the video equipment failed. Kind of like what happened to me whenever I was standing in front of a judge with Jolene Nugent representing me in Wheeling, West Virginia. And the 911 dispatcher said, "Well, I don't know what happened, Your Honor. It must have been a failure of the equipment." Right? Even though I was recording the very same conversation, word for word. There was nothing even close to me threatening any president or going to do any type of bodily harm to anybody.
Better actor than people give him credit for. That he actually, is good at portraying a kind of bravado that, to the point Chris Christie made, isn't necessarily real. He is somebody who, just when I was researching the book that I did on him, the people who know him will say that what Donald Trump has always benefited from is stronger men that could protect him, whether it was his father or whether it was an attorney, whether it was Michael Cohen. He always had a bulldog. And they did the fighting. He didn't even like firing people for all his "you're fired" being his thing. He didn't fire anyone. The producers decided who got fired on The Apprentice, and he would just say the words "you're fired." And he's good at delivering the line, but he's good at actually doing the thing, firing people.
Correct.
He even hesitated with Jeff Sessions. He was very back and forth on it. So
he never fired Mueller.
He never fired Mueller.
This is so important, and this is so true. And I think the other part of it is how afraid he was when Michael Cohen became ensnared criminally, because he knows that the people who have protected him have all the goods on him.
That's right.
And the reason he's always had, and I think people close to him would describe it as a fetish for Roy Cohn. I mean, he spent his whole time as president looking for an attorney general that was more like Roy Cohn. Yeah. I mean, he has always seen himself as criminally exposed enough to need Roy Cohn.
Yeah, but what did Bill Barr do for him when it came to Michael Cohen? He re-incarcerated him for the offense of insisting on writing a book that Trump was afraid would expose him. And so Barr did his Roy Cohn for him.
And go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say is we believe that this process may be coming to a close. Again, what we've just seen is that we have seen Trump's motorcade has arrived at the Fulton County Jail. We had confirmation that he had entered the Fulton County Jail, that he was arrested and was in custody. We now have confirmation that he has been released. So this is a brief period of custody. He was in fact under arrest. He is now released on his own recognizance. We know the terms of his bail. He has posted $200,000 bond. We believe that with the help of a bail bondsman, he had to put up $20,000 cash to that bail bondsman, and the bondsman will put up the remainder. That will assure that he doesn't flee. Donald Trump has already, I should mention, on social media been sort of joking about fleeing to Russia.
No.
Not a great time. Not a great time.
It's like being a bunker in an airport. But
You
can't even get McDonald's.
But if I can quote Rachel on a big news night, when we lived through this whole era, you always said, "Watch what they do, not what they say." And He can joke about being above the system. We'll see what face he makes if there's a mugshot release. He can do all the theatrics Joy was talking about, and we will cover and fact check it. But the action is to go down to Georgia by the deadline. And the reason is, if he waited past tomorrow, the DA said she would send the police to apprehend him, and he understands that the Secret Service will not interfere with a standing lawful arrest warrant, that they would step aside and he would be taken in the back of a cop car and driven or perhaps, you know, a flight, but however the distance back. And so watch what they do. What he is doing, as I think we're really seeing, and it's kind of hitting me in the moment, it's like he is again, in the physical and legal sense, surrendering and submitting to the power of this DA and this process, while he says and does a lot of other, while he says
and that's your point, Rachel. That's your first point, that he's not in control. He is going to act like he is. He's acting like Hugo Chavez, but he is not. This was not on his timeline. This was not in his venue. This was not his lighting, I am sure, unless he carried a ring light. This is not produced. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
And you played, Nicole, you played the video of him saying, you know, when people do an arrest and he's at his rally, and you played it on your show today, don't be gentle. Don't be gentle putting him in that car.
Well, isn't that the irony of all of this from the Law and Order party?
But he doesn't want that happening.
Giuliani, who spent years perp walking people in the New York City streets, claiming, so incensed yesterday about the fact that he would have to, that he was going to be part of the ignobility of the perp walk and the mugshot, and the party of Law and Order that is now attacking prosecutors and our system of justice, and the party of Law and Order that, you know, is trying to defund the FBI and defund the special counsel's office. I mean, the irony is just so.
But you know, but I think, given how unprecedented and how unusual all of this is, it's worth taking a moment to think about the things that didn't happen. He didn't flee. He didn't decide he was going to have a standoff, you know, between federal and state law enforcement. When he was first indicted, it was another state indictment. It was in New York, and he was at Mar-a-Lago at the time, I believe. And Governor Ron DeSantis came out and said, Florida law enforcement will not facilitate any extradition request, setting the table so that if Trump wanted to not voluntarily surrender to that first indictment in New York, Donald Trump was going to be barricaded at Mar-a-Lago while Florida state troopers were asked to protect him from the law enforcement that would otherwise be coming to collect him to bring him to account. I mean, that could have been, I mean, this is crazy, but we could have been at crazy times X.
Totally.
And we haven't seen that. And that's worth, I think, what's worth noting where we are, keeping perspective on that. I would also just say, and this may seem like a small point, but again, had it gone the other way, it would mean something very different. This is a very orderly scene. And you see, I think those are 3 Sheriff's Department buses that are pulled up in front of the Sally Port, essentially to create a smaller corridor there, also to block the view, also presumably for security. They had this planned out. This is the motorcade had a clear run from the airport to the Sheriff's Department. You saw they had cleared the streets. There were, you know, not a ton of protesters, but there were several dozen protesters around, and some people on both sides and lots of media around at the Fulton County Jail today. You are not seeing disorder around this. I was worried about that, I have to tell you personally, when we saw Rudy Giuliani yesterday, day before yesterday? Yes, yesterday. When he turned himself in and then tried to make remarks to reporters, and there was a physical crush around him and chaos that is not at all an entertaining thing to see, and there's no justice in that for anybody, and that was not good, and it did not bode well for this much higher stakes moment with President Trump.
What you're describing requires a lot of communication.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't just happen that there's order. It means they were talking all day, every day. Trump has advanced people, and they were talking around the clock to Fani Willis's team.
Yeah, and Fani Willis made public-facing statements to the authorities in Fulton County about making sure there weren't other trials in the courtroom, talking about court staff and district attorney staff working from home, setting out the time frame well in advance so they could do this sort of planning. When we saw that scrummer on Giuliani yesterday, I was worried that for all of that, they had not planned this well. They have clearly planned this well, and that's an important political part of this process in terms of who we are as a constitutional republic. This is law and order. This is the orderly, calm, bloodless, efficient prosecution of the law. in a situation where the president is not in control, but he is nevertheless safe. And he is being treated in accordance with due process, as any American has as their right.
And it is important to note that that happened despite the fact that, as we've all been covering, the atmospherics before today have been deeply disturbing. The kind of messages that Fonnie Willis has been getting, the threats that her staff have been getting, the threats that everyone involved in this have been enduring have been terrifying. Those barricades have been up for weeks in front of the courthouse. I mean, they've been preparing, and Trump has been all but calling for civil war. And I want, he's not gotten any of it, right? He's calling for massive protests and massive resistance and all the rest. It hasn't happened. But the atmospherics leading into today, it is a relief to see that it is so calm, because it's been so deeply ugly and frightening before.
I was surprised when he used one of his social media accounts to repost a call for protest today. Somebody who said they were going to be traveling from out of state to Atlanta to Fulton County today, and they gave the actual address, the street address of the jail. Trump reposted that himself, effectively calling on people to turn out and protest for him today in Fulton County, which you might expect would have a big effect on his followers, particularly the way that he has attacked Fonnie Willis and this prosecution and the number of people who were prosecuted alongside him in this case. And the turnout, once again, was one, to say the least. He's not able to turn out people in the street to defend him here. Now, that doesn't mean that we haven't seen people do disturbing other things in response. We've had a lot of people arrested. We've had a few instances of violence where people say they are acting in his name or out of anger in terms of the way that he's being treated. But in terms of him threatening to, make the streets run with blood, or to see that the biggest protests America has ever seen, and America's going to be sorry if the criminal justice system is ever brought to bear against him, he talked that game, but he has not been able to walk that walk.
Now let me ask you a question. This is a hypothetical question. What if Donald J. Trump was black? What if this was Obama going through all these different scenarios? Do you really think that the ordeal that happened January the 6th would have been, in which it was bad, don't get me wrong, it was very, very bad. But do you really think that it would have been that kosher if it would have been a black man being attacked by the system because the black man was speaking up in the same aspect of how Donald Trump is speaking up? They talk about a civil war. That would be probably one of the flames of fire that would create a civil war here in America if they was to be doing what they're doing right now to a black person. Not to say that black people get away with anything any differently than white people do, but on this level, the level that it's at right now, if this was Obama going through all this, I can just about guarantee you the turnout would have been different in and on probably every event, all four events. The turnout, the whole mental concept, the whole revening up of people's of their mental state and their emotions, it would have been different.
Well, you have to give Merrick Garland's Justice Department some of the credit. I mean, I went back and watched Stephen Ayer's testimony for the January 6th Select Committee, and hearing, and I guess the congressional investigation as well, hearing and seeing the accountability that the insurrectionists have had to face. It's not enough until everyone at the top of the chain faces accountability. But
it would be rather on the same level of what went on down in Memphis, I think about 6 months ago or something like that, where all them officers that was beating up on that FedEx black worker that worked for FedEx or UPS or something, it would have been the same difference if all those officers would have been white versus all those officers was black. It would have been a completely different concept of an uproar if those officers would have all been white versus them officers all being black. That's how close we are in a major disturbance coming into play here in America, that just within a matter of an instant could cause total chaos. And it's really sad because it has taken this type of aggression just to whip the 1%ers down to the point that the black man, the black individual person, has equal rights, the same as the whites, that should have taken off and took into play during the era of Abraham Lincoln. But it's been a constant struggle pertaining to a power play of the 1%ers, the powerful, the elite, that says no matter what, we're gonna call the shots. We're gonna be the ones in power, and we're gonna do what we want to do. And that's what has motivated America and America's politics for years and years and years. And to be quite frank with you, I don't know what it's going to take to break that cycle pertaining to the 1%ers, because they have basically got the 99%ers over the barrel. Or they think that they do. They think that they do. They would like to believe that they do. And they promote that in part of their defense. But the fact of the matter is, the country still belongs to we the people. And it's those 1%ers that depend upon the 99%ers. And like I was telling you earlier, that once there's not enough 99%ers to live off of because of the 3 strikes you're out or whatever, the system has just basically fractured itself, then they start eating on themselves. And that's basically what you're seeing right here with Donald Trump. You're seeing the 1%ers attacking now the other 1%ers and trying to take what other 1%ers has already gotten.
Reporters in jail or awaiting sentencing for their roles in the insurrection.
Yeah, and also people, I think, have followed this and see there is consequence, and there's not the invincibility. The Proud Boys, the militias, the so-called tough talk, a lot of people are in a lot of trouble. We talked about last night that the potential nominee, Donald Trump, the defendant, is in a lot of trouble. These other co-defendants are in a lot of trouble. And so it's one thing to play games on the internet or even go to 1 or 2 rallies and dabble in what you think is trolling the other side. And it's another thing to gamble your whole life. And since the DOJ started its thing, we talked about that. That was for the physical trespassing and worse insurrection that day. That was one piece. Those were the shock troops, right? And we've seen a lot less of that shock troop style wannabe activity. And now, as Joy and I and others were discussing tonight, the co-defendants are getting hit for the first time. So Giuliani's pretty famous. Meadows is a known figure in the Tea Party sort of MAGA world. Eastman and others maybe a little less so. These are big mug shots, and they're going around the country, and people understand. And then you have Jen Ellis and others, as Rachel reported, saying, oh, we're not even being funded, which creates the notion of a fissure. And then you have the legal precedent I mentioned, which is large-scale RICO cases in this county and others usually involve some convictions. So while we all understand why it's so significant to watch here, this RICO defendant, Donald Trump, get his booking, the fact that people understand and know that there is a, shall we say, consequence and likely more on the way, I think it definitely chills, or as former prosecutor Giuliani would say back when he brought RICO cases, deters crime.
Let me just mention one news point. We do have confirmation here, as you see on your screen, that the former president did have a mugshot taken inside the jail. And you see the motorcade starting to move here. Trump has been taken into custody and then released in Fulton County, Georgia. This is his federal motorcade with Secret Service protection and an inordinate number of motorcycle escorts. Good for him. He's leaving the Fulton County jail here. These are live images that you're watching, that we're watching along with you. See, there's the start of the parade. We do not know when we will have access to the president's mugshot, but we do expect that that will be released alongside the ones that Ari was just describing that we've seen from so many other these high-profile figures. Our friend Chris Hayes joins us now here at the table. Chris, as we watch this live shot, I just have to ask, what do you think is memorable about this moment?
Well,
what Ari was just saying before, there's a few things going on. There's a surreality to it. There's the strangeness of this now being like a thing that we get together and do every few weeks, which is bizarre. And I think also to your point about the protests, like attenuates a little bit some of the desire to go and protest. It's like, well, maybe we'll get the one in September. Yeah. I think Ari, the point you made, Ari, I think is important. Trump, I don't want to psychologize a guy, but I think he has a sort of unique ability. I think it's largely a sort of sociopathic impulse to like just think that he's never going to face accountability. I think he lives in a world where, but like, I was talking to someone about this the other day, just thinking for myself. Like if I woke up tomorrow and I was like, you've been indicted criminally in Fulton County, you got to go down and I would be like freaked the hell out. I mean, I would be, it would be the worst day of my life. I would be super scared and upset, and I would be worried about paying for a lawyer and worried about what was going to happen to my kids and my family. Like, all of that feels like weirdly remote because of the strangeness of Trump and because he kind of like the Roadrunner floats above the cliff without falling. But to the Jenna Ellises of the world, like, you got to be like having some pretty dark nights of the soul right now, going in there, getting booked in Fulton County. And now looking at like, you're not going to be president and you're not going to get out of this. He might have some scheme to get out of it, but you, Jenna Ellis, and the rest are not getting out of this. And the reality of that really, really sets in as you watch him go in with his big phalanx and how different that is than Rudy Giuliani seen the other day and everyone else.
Yeah, and Donald.
And one of his.
All right, let's go to CNN and see if they're covering the same thing. I'm pretty sure they are.
It is going to be interesting
to
see this. I don't know if would cameras be in the courtroom for that?
Yes, and that's really important
so
because
to actually hear what the.
Let's go to this one. This looks like a cop
But
show.
since he has his paperwork on it, it validates.
Okay, cop show. Prime time here. Let's
Loving, idealistic, hardworking people.
Okay, let's go to this one.
Of our city for delivering control.
Right there, see if it's got a live shot. Nope.
Supported by Black Americans.
No live shot. But tomorrow it'll be on every one of the frequencies. Tomorrow it'll be on all of them.
Courtroom and start your trial.
Yep.
big incident? Is there going to be a lone wolf? There's a long way to go, but I think it's a good testament to our criminal justice system, to the people who protect it, the people who work in jails, prisons, and courthouses, that we've done this now 4 times and it's gone the way it should.
We also have to remember there's going to be a defense here, and the defense, is as you see people ask to be separated and severed. The defense had planned to be a unified defense, which starts off with 1, we were receiving in the campaign numerous reports of suspicious activity, fraud, and so on. 2, we didn't have the resources of the FBI or a large agency to investigate it, so we got people to look at it, we got all these reports in, we had all these suspicions. 3, we took this evidence, which wasn't fully baked, but it's what we had at the time, and to try and slow down the process, we went to courts, and dozens of them refused to hear us, either on the evidence, but mostly on standing. Then we went to legislative bodies. So their overarching argument is going to be, it doesn't matter if we won or lost, it doesn't matter if we were right or wrong, it doesn't even matter if we lied in a press conference. When it came to using the system, we went to the courts, we went to the legislative bodies, and we believe we did it by the book. Now, you have a special prosecutor in Washington and a district attorney in Fulton County who say there were things that weren't true, they knew they weren't true, this was actually a calculated fraud, actually a racketeering exercise. But I've been involved in 1 million investigations as a reporter and as an investigator and an analyst in police departments in the FBI. You never really know the full story till you hear it all in court, and both sides put all their evidence out on the table, even if you think you do.
I think that's true. I do want to point out that that 2 things can be true at the same time. There are things that are unconventional that Trump did, but they're not unlawful. There are things that he did that were unlawful. Now, it is unconventional for a candidate to take it as far as he did, to play out all these extra innings. The Constitution allows for all these extra innings past the vote with the Electoral College and the state legislatures and all this sort of stuff. It's unconventional for somebody to just keep fighting. You're not supposed to do that. We usually, 100 years, that's not unlawful. It's not unlawful to play in the extra innings. It's unlawful to cheat in the extra innings. And that's what he did.
So I was just gonna, the question here, I think, as we watch this play out, is what impact is it gonna have politically on the primary? Because we're unlikely to see a trial before that. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but is it gonna have any impact further than tonight and tomorrow? Is it gonna play out? Are voters gonna rethink, primary voters gonna rethink their vote when they go to the caucuses in Iowa, when they go to the polls in New Hampshire, when they vote in South Carolina? I mean, that's to be determined yet, and you know, we still got a long way to go here.
See, I'm going to tell you what the system has against it right now. The system is $30-something trillion in debt, got all the drug overdoses, the gun violence, jails being full, all the illegal immigrants that's coming over here, people hacking into people's accounts and jeopardizing people's privacy as well as their public safety. These are all things that are stacked up against the system. And the people knows this. The people knows that the system is basically on its last leg. I'm gonna use that analogy. It's on its last leg, and if something doesn't incredibly happen between now and the next few years, Dulce-Dally or whatever that old saying is towards the end, that's going to happen to the system itself. Now, some people tell you, well, if you got any money in the bank, they're probably going to take about half of it, or if you got any stocks, bonds, CDs, any of that stuff. That's the reason why the gold bullion thing on TV is promoting the ideal towards buying more gold and buying more silver, because they're promoting the ideal of the system going to crash. I personally think that the system has already crashed, theoretically speaking. They just haven't announced it yet. Just like with all the violence, all the gun violence all over our streets, that, you know, the system has failed to take care of the American people to the extent that we're almost in a civil war. And I guess the only reason why that they haven't declared it as a civil war is because they haven't announced it as it being a civil war. But we're in an area right now as American sovereign citizens that I don't think even George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or any of the other founders could have began to imagine it was going to happen to the American land here in America, of where we are today in the 21st century in the year 2023. This is so much instability. And like I said a while ago, our adversaries, it don't matter if it's China, don't matter if it's Russia, don't matter who it is, they're looking at all this and they're seeing this as a form of weakness, which makes us that much more vulnerable. Where did it begin? Who started it? Who took a left turn whenever they should have took a right? The main perpetrators that has put us where we are today has still